me one second. All right, we had to make sure the babies were settled down because reading time for them is noise time. All right, I'm simulcasting. Say word. Look at the moon of simulcasting. Like I said, once again, shout out to Dr. Boyce for putting me on. I didn't know this was possible, but here we are. And so if you're on Facebook, you don't have to leave. And if you're on YouTube, that's what's up. And so, okay, Facebook, you're really not familiar with, or maybe you are. I'm not sure. So I just want to up to date. We've been doing the Left Project on YouTube. Shout out to all the YouTubers who've been tuning in from the beginning of the year. Instead of complaining about Black history only being one day a year or 1 week or 1 month, we've just been going straight through. So we started in January 1st, and now we're going into our 4th month, and we've been reading narratives, and it's been very beneficial. A lot of feedback, and that's excellent. Now, for those who are new, if you desire to read, all you have to do is hit me up either on any social media and let me know you want to read, and then I invite you into the Google Hangout, and then you can read. And so tonight we're going to read from 30 Years a Slave from Bondage to Freedom by Lewis Hughes. And we also had, we've had Lewis Hughes's grandson, J.C. Hughes. He usually comes in and reads. I think I saw he had a new job or something of that nature. And so we had him. So if you missed that interview, go ahead and listen back to that interview. It was a beautiful interview, how he found out that this is his actual great grandfather many times removed. So we have what's the word I'm looking for? We have a progeny or someone off of actual Lewis Hughes. So that's, for me, that was awesome. I don't know about anybody else, but since it's late, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. We are up to a family of free persons sold into slavery. So if you missed the beginning of them, you kind of have to go back. He's talking about how he was sold at 6. He's talking about his experience with the slave master. He's talking about, in his estimation, on his plantation, or what he saw. So a family of free persons sold into slavery. He says, my wife, Matilda, was born in Fayetteville County, Kentucky, June 17, 1830. It seems that her mother and her 7 children were to have been free according to the old Pennsylvania law. There were 2 uncles of the family who were also to have been free, but who had been kept over time. So they sued for their freedom and gained it. The lawyers in the case were abolitionists and friends to the slaves, and so that these men had justice. After they had secured their freedom, they entered suit for my wife, mother, their sister, and her 7 children. But as soon as the brothers entered this suit, Robin Logan, who claimed my wife's mother and her children as his slaves, put them into a trader's yard in Lexington. And when he saw that there was a possibility of being successful in securing their freedom, he put them in jail to be sold down the river. And it's talking about their practices. They were underhanded in their practices. And we've learned over the time with these narratives that our foreparents kind of understood not to trust the word of a European, because they would say that the slave master's word is not good. We kind of forgot that these days, though, but let me continue. This was a deliberate attempt to keep them from their rights, for he knew that they were to have been set free many years before, and this fact was known to all of the neighborhood. My wife's mother was born free. Her mother, having passed the allotted time under a law, had been free for many years. Yet they kept her children as slaves. And for those who are new, that's the law. There was a law that was passed in 1665 thereabouts, that says that the status of the child follows that of the mother. So if your mother was a slave, and you become a slave, but if your father is free, it still doesn't matter. It's what your mother is. And they passed that law because a woman by the name of Elizabeth Keyes, she went to court and sued for her freedom, as he's talking about here, and she actually won. And after that, they went into their little secret chambers and started changing rules. It says, oh, wait a minute, I forgot to share this. Hold on 1 second. So we're learning a lot of things in these readings. We're learning how things develop, what they used to be. Hold on 1 second. I forgot to share this. And so for me, anyway, it takes me out of the abstract. And those who have been those who have been tuning in, they attest to this too, that slavery is no longer this abstract thought that we used to be like slavery, you know, it was bad. It was really, really bad. And we don't have any reference point. That's not the case these days. Now that we are going back into this history, we can substantiate what it is that we're saying. So we can have names, places, dates, you know, it makes us more intelligible or intelligent in our conversation as it relates to slavery, because it's a deep, deep conversation. It's not just something to be brushed over. So he says here, this was a deliberate attempt to keep them from their rights, for he knew that they were to have been set free many years before, and this fact was known to all the neighborhood. My mother's wife was born free. Her mother, having passed the allotted time under a law, had been free many years. I read that. Okay, yet they kept their children as slaves in plain violation of the law as well as justice. The children of free persons under Southern laws were free. This was always admitted. The course of Logan is putting the family in jail for safekeeping until they could be sent to the Southern market was a tacit admission that he had no legal hold upon them. And that was interesting, because this is what these people used to do. They would put you in jail, like they would buy you off the slave market and then put you in jail to wait to go ahead and do whatever it is they need to do with you. Like you were a criminal, like you're the criminal after they bought you. But anyway, I digress. It says, the children of free persons under Southern laws were free. This was always admitted. Okay, I said that. It says Woods and Collins, a couple of nigger traders. And for those who may be offended by the word nigger, this is all throughout the book. It's not something that I'm making up. And this was the real terminology, and this is how it was used. Black people used it towards other black people, and Europeans use it towards black people. So it's very interesting, the history of this word and how it was used. It says a couple of nigger traders were collecting a drove of slaves for Memphis, Tennessee. And this time, and when they were ready to start, all the family were sent off with the gang. So they stole the family, didn't give them their freedom, and then sold them to nigger traders so that they can collect some money off of them. It says, and when they arrived in Memphis, they were put in the trader's yard of Nathan Bedford Forrest. The Forrest afterward became a general in the rebel army and commanded at the capture of Fort Pillow. And in harmony with the debasing influences of his early business, he was responsible for the fiendish massacre of Negroes after the capture of the fort, an act which will make his name forever infamous. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and underline his name because I didn't know nothing about him. Nathan Bedford Forrest seems to me like somebody to understand, because he's saying those in that time would have known who he was. Like right now, some Negro is in Nathan Bedford Forrest and has no idea about the history of that place. I'm just saying. It says, none of this family were sold to the same person except my wife and one sister. All the rest were sold to different persons. So there goes the splitting of the family. Your brother, literal physical brother, is on another plantation. And as you grow, you don't know it. There's stories of, there was a story in one of the narratives that the mother married a son unknowingly because he had been sold off when she was a child. And when she got, when she married him and saw a scar that she realized that was her son. They had stories of sisters, because they're attracted for some reason to the individual, sisters marrying brothers. And so this is where it's coming from, this breaking up of the family. It says none of this family was sold to the same person except my wife and one sister. All the rest was sold to different persons. The elder daughter was sold 7 times in one day. The reason of this was that the parties that bought her, finding that she was not legally a slave and that they could get no written guarantee that she was, got rid of her as soon as possible. So these nigger traders or these slave thieves could not substantiate that this individual was a slave, and they kept selling her. It says, it seems that those who bought the other members of the family were not so particular and were willing to run the risk. They knew that such things, such as outrages upon law and justice, were common. Among these were my boss, who bought 2 of the girls, Matilda and her sister Mary Ellen, Matilda was bought for a cook, and her sister was a present to Mrs. Farrington, his wife's sister. So they were literally buying you like you would buy a blender. Oh, this blender is going to go to such and such for this pagan holiday. You understand what I'm saying? Oh, you know, I need this new GPS. And the man became the GPS. I'm trying to get closer to where the signal is not so weak. So she was brought to act as her maid and seamstress. Aunt Delia, who had been cook, was given another branch of work to do, and Matilda was instead installed as the cook. I remember well the day she came. The madame greeted her and said, "Well, what can you do, girl?" That's the old school interview. And we heard that when they would go to the slavery yard. This is how they would interview. Well, what can you do? It says that they said, "Have you ever done any cooking? Where are you from?" Matilda was, as I remember her, a sad picture to look at. She had been a slave, it is true, but had seen good days to what the slaves down the river saw. Anyone could see she was almost heartbroken. She never seemed happy. Days grew into weeks and weeks into months, but the same routine of work went on. And so sometimes, like when we're reading this, to put yourself in the position of what he's just describing, that you lost everybody you know, your family, and everybody's sold in different direction, and you're expected to show up for a job interview that you're not going to get paid for, and somebody's over there in your face after you are in shock, disbelief, mourning, and grieving, and like he says, the work just goes on, and they're in your face like everything that just happened doesn't matter, and now I need you to tell me, girl, what can you do? Now get to work. Very, very interesting. Those who are on Facebook, if you can type for me and tell me if you can see it, if it's well, because it keeps saying the commenting is weak. So if you can see it, feel free to let me know, and that would be good. My marriage and birth of twins. So this is a real story, like we said, and he's going step by step into his experience. So this sad girl, because he was also sad when he arrived. He was sad because he was torn away from his parents. So he was vibrating for some reason with Matilda, because now he's going to marry her. Matilda had been there 3 years when I married her. The boss had always promised that he would give me a nice wedding, and he kept his word. He was very proud and liked praise. The wedding that he gave us was indeed a pleasant one. All the slaves from their neighbor acquaintance were invited. One thing boss did was a credit to him, but it was rare among slaveholders. He had me married by their parish minister. So this is supposed to be like, ooh, you understand? It was a beautiful evening, the 30th of November, 1858, when Matilda and I stood in the parlor of the McGee house and were solemnly made man and wife. Old Master Jack came up from Panola at the time and was there when the ceremony was performed. As he looked through his fingers at us, he was overheard saying, "It will ruin them, giving weddings." So the Europeans always looked at each other and implored one another not to treat the help too kindly, because the notion is going to get into the other slaves' heads. So he's saying it's going to ruin them by giving them weddings. It says, things went on as usual after this. The madame grew more and more irritable and exacting, always finding fault with the servants, whipping them or threatening to do so. Hold on one second. Yeah, hold on one second, please. One second. Let me see if I can get closer. For some reason it needs a stronger signal here. One second. All right, it's back. That's the one thing with the live stream. All right, so if the backstory on his mistress is that she was really mean, and he actually ran away twice, and the second time he got whipped when he came back. She was mean to him. She always hit him around and beat him around. So he's saying that after he got married, it says the madame grew more irritable and exacting, always finding fault with the servants, whipping them or threatening to do so upon the slightest provocation or none at all. There was something in my wife's manner, however, which kept the madame from whipping her. An open or implied threat, perhaps, that such treatment would not be endured without resistance or protest of some sort or kind. This the madame regarded as a great indignity, and she hated my wife for it, and at times was ready to crush her. So great was her anger. So people would say, and he was a house slave. People would say, this is what we're dispelling some of these myths, that house slaves were better off than field slaves. He actually lived amongst them in the house and had to endure them. So if you had a wretched or an indignant, a very angry mistress or master, you're in their personal space. So the thought that that's like living with a disgruntled family member, the thought that living in this space means it's better because you're actually in master's house, this is not accurate. And that's one of the things that we can begin to deconstruct that false narrative. It says here, in a year, there were born to us twin babies, and the madame now thought she had my wife tied, as the babies would be a barrier to anything like resistance on her part, and there would be no danger of her running away. She therefore thought that she could enjoy without hindrance the privilege of beating the woman of whose womanhood she theretofore stood somewhat in fear. So it wasn't only the men that were getting beaten, women were getting beaten as well. And this woman who was very indignant, oftentimes these mistresses, they say they were more wicked than the men, because oftentimes they felt like they had something to prove, you know, whether it be they were jealous because their husbands were sleeping with the slaves, or they were just miserable because they're in the humid heat climate that they're not used to. Whatever the issue and reason, whether they were idle all day because they have people and servants to do their jobs that they're supposed to do, so they have more time for idleness, whatever it was, some of these women were really wicked. She happened to be one of them, and now she's unleashing this wickedness on his wife. So I'm going to go ahead and read one more here. Madame's cruelty to my wife and children. And you still have to call her Madame and show her some kind of respect, as he's doing in this narrative. It said, boss said from the first that I should give my wife assistance as she needed time to care for the babies. Really, he was not as bad as the madame at heart, for she tried to see how hard she could be on us. She gave me all the extra work to do that she could think of, apparently to keep me from helping my wife in the kitchen. She had all the cooking to do for 3 heavy meals each day, all the washing and ironing of the finest clothes, besides caring for the babies between times. Like at what time? This is another thought, that Black women always worked. They always worked. Because in slavery, you were working, like he's saying, your child was always to a certain degree secondary because you had master's bidding. It's the same way they give you what, 6 weeks for postpartum. They give you 6 weeks for your maternity leave, back to work. 6 weeks, baby, you go to the babysitter and you back to master's bidding. And this is what he's describing. Nothing much has really changed. It says, in the morning, she would nurse the babies, then hurry off to the kitchen to get breakfast while they were left in charge of a little girl. And by the way, you want to talk about child labor? This is not the only narrative that said that the children were the babysitters. And sometimes they were the age of 4 and 5 years old, 6 years old, too young to go into the field. They use these little children to watch children. Now, if you leave a child to watch a child, they call child services on you. But this was the institution that they manufactured. I'm just saying, but I'll continue. And my voice is going here. Again at noon, she repeated her visit to the babies after cooking the dinner, then in the evening. After supper, she would go to nurse them again. After supper was over, dishes all washed and kitchen in order, she would then go to the little ones for the night. So imagine that. The morning, hold on one second. The morning, quick nursing. So the babies are not bonding. Let's just say that. She's going in and out trying to give them, because they didn't have formula. There was no Infomil. So this is how the babies were getting nourished. It says, one can see she had very little time with the children. My heart was sore and heavy, for my wife was almost run to death with work. The children grew puny and sickly of proper care. This is not me saying this. This is him saying it. It says here, oh, Brother JC, you on. We miss you. I see Brother JC was liking it. We're reading it. We're finally back up. That's who I'm speaking about. This is Brother JC's ancestor that we're reading right about now. So hopefully he'll definitely join us back again as we're continuing on with this conversation. But this battery looked like it's going to die. So I'm going to hurry up on this chapter here. Shout out to Brother JC. It says, the children grew puny and sickly for want of proper care. The doctor said it was because the milk the mother nursed to them was so heated by her constant and excessive labors as to be unwholesome, and she never had time to cool before ministering to them. So the little things, instead of thriving and developing as was their right, dwindled toward the inevitable end. Oh, we were wretched. Our hearts ached for a day which we could call our own. My wife was a Christian, and had learned to know the worth of prayer. So would always speak consolingly. God would help us. She said, let us try and be patient. Our trial went on until one morning I heard a great fuss in the kitchen. The madame calling for the yard man to come and tie my wife, as she could not manage her. Okay, so now they're trying to tie this woman up. My wife had always refused to allow the madame to whip her, but now, as the babies were here, mistress thought she would try it once more. So this is a power struggle here. It says, Matilda resisted and Madame called for the boss. In a minute, he came and grabbed my wife, commenced choking her and saying to her, what do you mean? Is that the way you talk to ladies? My wife had only said to her mistress, you shall not whip me. So this is what they would call obstinate. This is what they would call the angry black woman. His wife would have been considered the angry black woman, the rebellious woman, the one who was not going to allow you to debase her and to whip her. And there were some women who said, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that. It says, my wife had only said to her mistress, you shall not whip me. This made her furious, hence her call for boss. I was in the dining room and could hear everything. My blood boiled in my veins to see my wife so abused. Yet I dare not open my mouth. This also is looking into the dynamic of the male and female, black male and female, not being able to open their mouths and defend one another in situations, starting in this, where he knew that if he opened his mouth, that was his life. So there's the pitting of one against the other. It says, after the fuss, my wife went straight to the laundry. I found her there and found her bundled up her baby's clothes, which was washed but not ironed. I knew at a glance that she was going away. Boss had just gone to the city, and I did not know what to say, but I told her to do the best she could. Often when company came and I held the horses or did an errand for them, they would tip me to a quarter or half a dollar. This money I always saved, and so had a little change, which I now gave to Matilda. So now she's like, yo, I'm sorry, I gotta leave you. And he was like, I know. And here you go. The dynamic, we talk about the damage internally with the relationship, the roles reversing and everything, each man for self, because no one could protect each other. It says, this money I also saved, and so had a little change, which I now gave to Matilda for her use in her effort to get away from her cruel treatment. She started at once for Forest Trader's Yard, which the baby's in her arms. She's running with twins. Like, I'm a mother of twins, okay? They're heavy. You know, and she's dipping with twins, so she's serious. It says, and after she got into Memphis, she stopped outside the yard to rest. While she was sitting on a curbstone, Forrest came out of the yard by the back gate and saw her. Coming up to her, he said, "My God, Matilda, where are you doing here? Or what are you doing here? You have changed, so I would not have known you. Why have you come here?" Matilda said, "I came back here to be sold again." So she's like, "Yo, forget this. Let me try again to get sold." He says he stepped back and called another nigger trader, Collins by name, from Kentucky. "Look here," said Forrest, pointing to my wife. Collins took in the situation at once and said he would buy her and the children. I'm gonna just keep going because the battery on this phone, this is a wild story. "That woman is of good family," said he, "and was only sold to prevent her from getting her freedom. She was then taken into the yard." "Oh," said Forrest, "I know these McGees. They are hard colts." Word was then sent McGee that his cook was in the yard and had come to be sold. He went in haste to the yard. Collins offered to buy her, but McGee said no man's money could buy that woman and her children. "I raised her husband and I would not separate them." This is the fake sentiment, you know, the fake sentimental attachment. I keep telling everybody, for those who are just joining us, this is the Left Project. My name is Amuna Yisrael. We're reading 30 Years a Slave. And just pardon my comments because sometimes you just can't hold it. But this fake sentimental value that these Europeans oftentimes try to profess in public, after the woman is being abused and she's being mistreated and misused, now you in public talking about, "Oh, I raised her husband," which you also abused. But anyway, let me continue. Domestic abuse. Just continue to look at slavery as domestic abuse because that's exactly what it was. It says, "I raised her husband and I would not separate them. She was brought back, and as they rode along in the rockaway, boss said, when I'm through with you, I guess you won't run away again." So here goes the threats. Like, when I get you home, I'm gonna do bop, 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 bop to you. The volume is going in and out. I'm so sorry. On the cell phone, and that's my email, big up to my email. On the cell phone, I need to be closer to the door because it keeps going in and out on me. But if you're not getting the volume here, definitely go to YouTube while we work on. This is my first Facebook stream, so we're gonna work out those kinks. It says here, "When I'm through with you, I guess you won't run away again." As they drove up, I saw the madame go running out to meet them. She shouted to Matilda, "Ah, madame, you put up at the wrong hotel." They at once, and this is all, you got bravado because why? You feel like you got the upper hand, but when the tables are turned, it doesn't always work out like that. It says, "Ah, Matilda, you put up the wrong hotel." They at once went to the barn where my wife was tied to the joist, and boss and the madame beat her by turns. After they had finished the whipping, boss said tauntingly, "Now I'm buying you and selling you. I want you to know that I never shall sell you while my head and yours is hot." I was trembling from head to foot, for I was powerless to do anything for her. So imagine the husband, the protector, the provider, and he has to admit in this narrative and to himself that he was powerless. What level of frustration is he feeling? How is he looking at the woman? How is he looking at the self? How did they raise their children? How was this thought passed on? Question. My twin babies lived only 6 months after that, not having had the care they needed, and which it was impossible for their mother to give them while performing the most endless labor required of her, under threats of cruel beatings. One day, not long after our babies were buried, the madame followed my wife to the smokehouse and said, "I am tempted to take that knife from you, Matilda, and cut you in two. You and old Reuben, one of the slaves, went all around the neighborhood and told the people that I killed your babies and almost whipped you to death." Of course, when the slaves were accused falsely, as in this case, they were not allowed to make a reply. They just had to endure in silence whatever was said. So imagine somebody coming up with false charges against you, and according to their system, when you look at their system, a slave cannot testify against the master. And also another book that I'm reading, Frances Kimball, she's on record by saying that the Europeans had a going saying that slaves are liars. So you can't believe anything that they say. And so not only are you getting abused, it's like abusive family or relationship where the person comes out, the young child comes out and say, hey, I'm being abused. And everybody turns on the individual because they don't want to and say that you're a liar. So this is the domestic violence situation of slavery. I like to give that analogy because that's exactly what it is. You have someone who's powerless, like a child would be, or dependent would be, and then you have the abuser who has all the power, who pretends that they love you while they're abusing you, hurting you. And this trauma, this attachment that Black people and white people have to one another is like that of the Stockholm syndrome. So this is how, if we begin to look at it like this, we can begin to unravel the pieces and the delusion that existed in this peculiar institution. So as this thing is about to go out, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Feel free to join us again. I'm glad we're simulcasting. So we'll be joined again to go over and continue this book, Efforts to Learn to Read and Write. And this is Lewis Hughes. And if you want to check it out, it's free. It should be in the description box on, what's this? YouTube. And it's free for those who want to follow along, as well as for those who would like to read. So once again, thank you for joining us, and I hope to hear from you soon. Let us know your feedback. All right? Shalom.